Alright, volume 3 of this, whatever, Jordan Peterson, yeah, and Joe Rogan thingy. There's enough of an intro. Anyway, just this, whatever, cliche, almost, neocon of social construction or something. I mean, they're just fanatically paranoid and worried about any moderation from these traditional notions of we have you don't that's the way it should be. We have the rights, we have the power, we have the money. Fuck you. We're taking it all home. Some kind of thing. Like somehow that's good enough. That's civilization. And not even close. Somebody left a comment, the rude cowboy, something like, but I gripe that Marxism was never implemented. Well, Marxism wasn't a theory of what should be. It was a theory of what shouldn't be in the first place. And, Marx didn't go into a whole bunch of, well, how do you organize the cats? The point was is that you don't do it this way. This is the wrong way to do it. So there was no Marxism in the sense of any kind of positive replacement. But I would make the same argument about a lot of things that, not only was Marx not taken seriously, but democracy hasn't been taken seriously, in that we still have this horse and buggy, winner-take-all, regional, geographically biased, huge geographic bias. I am where I live, not what I believe. Democracy. I mean, a democracy that represents your geography, by, huge percentages, like 90%, 10% ideology. That kind of thing. That's not democracy. I mean, having, the last thing I want represented is like, I don't know, my shoe size and my geography. These are things that I just couldn't care to have represented. I just don't give a fuck about actually where I live. It really doesn't, it's not the thing I wish to control. Or have control, somehow be a representative of, be part of the clan of. No, I don't. I want to be part of bigger clans, more meaningful clans than this stupid local geography clan. So anyway, so I would argue that democracy hasn't even been tried, but certainly a rational system of incentive economics, again as I describe it. We have plenty of incentives to you're always rewarded for doing anything improving your contribution, your skills, and your capacity to provide in society. And you get paid for the risk you take and the hardships of the job and, the real factors, the real, how many years it might take off your life. Those things you get paid for, not how many people are applying for the job. How much desperation there is doesn't decide your salary. What you're contributing decides your salary. That kind of thing. And yes, you go to medical school, you invest, your brain space and your time and your energy. Yes, you can get more rewards. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just silly to have a system where we take the bulk of the incentives, the bulk of the reward and punishment. So we take the bulk of the rewards and distribute them randomly based on silly things like what vagina you fell out of, which is as silly as representing ideology through geography. That's the argument. So you can keep saying that you're going to say that socialism is communism and that socialism is trannyism, whatever these stupid arguments is you're going to make, but they're stupid because the truth is we haven't done the work it takes. And so yes, his bottom line is that somehow because it hasn't happened, it's because it failed. And the point is many of these things can't happen, unless you work at them. this is one of those arguments. I mean, I was talking to a psychological basket case the other day, and it's like some people have this expectation that they're going to be proficient at something even though they've done no work to do it, like raising a child, for example, and no planning, no anything, and they're just all of a sudden going to be a parent and everything's going to go fine. And that's so silly in terms of how unrealistic it is. That's like saying you're going to do that trapeze thing, or that swinging back and forth and flying through the air and doing somersaults and all that stuff. You're just going to sit there and get up on the podium and somehow innately know how to do this. Or juggling. You just don't all of a sudden pick up 7 bowling pins and throw them in the air and catch them all. It takes a lot of practice to understand the tricks and to understand the feel and to have a sense of it and to be able to do these things right. And societies have to understand that some things require, you have to work to create a good system. And that's all that's being argued here, I think, by many people, is that the human race is sort of in flux in terms of trying to find itself, what it is we live for. And a lot of that's being expressed in a lot of desperate efforts, okay, to try to find meaning. And I will, it doesn't matter what my opinion is, but I mean, yes, some of it's just desperate. And I think if people got what they wanted, that they got their sex changed, well, then you find out, well, this has all kinds of liabilities, and this doesn't do it for me either. They'd find it incomplete. Like many people find one drug, it's okay for a few weeks, and then they have to add drug number 4 and something else. They have to keep pouring shit into their coffee. So yeah, that's sort of like what this is. This is like the latte period of human experience. That we're pouring everything in to try to find something, some recipe that says something, but we're not doing it in any kind of rational, thoughtful way, examining the real root problem, which is the fact that we are just dinosaurs. I mean, yes, we don't look like them, but unfortunately the basic mechanism is built out of them. It's and if we're going to do something grander, it has to be something intellectual. But anyway, a little bit of a preach. See, so anyway, somebody else complained about me speeding these videos up, and I do apologize for that, but there's 2 hours and 50 minutes of this stuff. I'm not going to get through it, and I find it just easier for me to watch it. And so, I mean, I apologize, but now this is the way I'm going to do it. Sorry.
By the way that works at all. In fact, the evidence that there is suggests quite the contrary.
I saw this on one of your videos. You were discussing how preposterous this is on one of your videos because one of the people that was opposing you was actually a part of something like this, right?
Yeah, well, the Human Resources and Equity people at the University of Toronto have made mandatory unconscious racism training, anti-bias training, and they made it mandatory for their staff.
Right, so this is some sort of horror that you would actually recognize. First, usually it's a legal liability. Okay, that yes, you have to give your employees some sort of training so they don't walk around going, "Hey, nigga," or some other kind of bullshit. So they have to have some sort of training not to be, "Hey, look at that chick's got big boobs," some kind of bullshit like that. Yeah, grown-up behavior only at work.
Found that absolutely appalling. First of all, it's political re-education.
So you say mandatory?
But political re-education, so obliging somebody to take a course on how to drive without plowing into trees or something, whatever. That's brainwashing. Oh my! This is a professor. So what was I mean, what is he doing but brainwashing? Propagandizing for his cause. The boogeyman of the gulags are coming. The tranny gulag.
Something that you had engaged in?
No, I didn't have to because I'm not part of the Human Resources staff.
Okay.
But the people that they're consulting with to implement these sorts of programs certainly have faculty and students in their sites. I mean, these are trial runs for much broader rolling out of exactly this sort of of exactly this sort of.
Right, you know, the gulags. Yeah, they're gonna goose step them tomorrow, and they'll be, you know, putting us in whatever nonconformist camps.
Re-education
What's
process.
the methodology behind it, and how's this been vetted?
Oh, I don't think it's been vetted at all. Like, if you're going to, let's say you want to put in
I just don't even understand it. So it hasn't been vetted. So we haven't we don't see on YouTube examples of professionals acting preposterously unprofessionally, and we don't see any examples of racism gone amok. Gorillas in the mist. No, that never happens. Yes, we do see examples. We recognize there's a problem. People are cheerleaders for their team, and they have to be, you know, instructed that there's certain behavior at the ballpark you don't engage in. I mean, people had to be instructed, you know, at Yankee Stadium not to throw bottles at the opposing players. They actually have to be told, no, that's not part of the good sport. You throwing bottles at people's heads. No, not good sport.
into practice an educational process. What you need to do is you need to measure the initial state validly, so that your measure. So you need to use multiple measures, and all those measures need to say the same thing. So if you're going to
all the measures need to say the same thing. I don't know. You know. I mean, okay. So each time you measure it, it should come up with the same number. Well, that might be true. Look, the measurement is some people think that everything's fine. We don't have to worry about this stuff anymore because we've taken all the bigotry and biases and cheats and advantages out of the system. It's just not true. And they're also arguing that there's some paranoid worry that if we give a little too much, if there's too much of an inch of an encroachment because of a past crime, that somehow that's a new bias crime. And it's not. It's just a, you know, it's just a rational that you can never give back what you took away. It's like a criminal could kill somebody drunk driving. Now, and what if he recognizes, oh man, what a colossal asshole I was. Now, what do I do with my life? How do I reclamate? Well, he can't bring back what he killed. But what he can do is he can give other people advice. He can try to tell somebody else, hey, you know, this whole drinking thing doesn't go anywhere, and blah, blah, blah. And so in a sense, he could prevent many more people from going through the same tragedy. And so in a way be a huge plus, even though his life started with a huge negative. And so we could say that yes, the history and traditions have a lot of negatives in them, and if we're going to get rid of that shackle over, you know, human experience, and it's worth getting rid of, it's just those traditions are moronic. There's nothing to value in this. Men wear suits and men do this and men. There's nothing useful in any of this crap. People do things. And just understand that, yes, let's just leave it to that. Don't make it any more complicated than that. Because it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
accuse someone of racism, you need several different measures of racism, and then you have to show that across all the measures, it's like using different meters. All the meters should read the same thing. Then you have to implement your education.
So I'm just saying that, look, just on a superficial level, I mean, this you know, pretending that race isn't an issue. Maybe this is a Canadian thing, okay? But, you know, for most, I think most honest white Americans, they know racism is a problem. They see it all the time. They hear it all the time.
Educational intervention, carefully defined. Then you have to see afterwards if the consequence of the educational effort was a reduction in those initial indices, those initial measures, that sort of thing.
Well, again, like I said, maybe you can't do anything about the initial deprivations. Like I said, we can't fix the fact that we imported black people, we stripped them of their own culture, gave them a slave culture, and that slave culture was completely deprived of any kind of human growth, any kind of dignity or you know, it's a complex thing to talk about. You know, the necessity of having something to aspire to, and it suppressed all that. There was no, you could be president someday. No, they didn't have any of that. You could be a free man someday. Not even that. as something to live for. Well, anyway, and then deprive them of the ownership of their industry. And then you sit there and arrogantly talk from your privileged circumstance about how they're failures, how they haven't pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. They don't even own boots. And you're like, why don't you pull up your bootstraps? Well, you never gave them fucking boots. Fuck.
It's been done at all has showed that educational interventions of that sort that are mandatory actually make racism and bias worse rather than better. But
well, again, none of these statistics are going to show up. So somehow he's arguing that the fact that we have forced some compensations have in some way created more racism. I just think that's you can say it, but I don't think you can prove it.
why let a few facts stop you? Because we already know from the postmodernists that there's no such thing as facts anyways.
Right, so postmodernist, that is, I don't know what that even means. People who believe in human progress say there's no facts. Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, look, in Canada, here's something. This is one of the things that really makes me proud of my country. Our government has now announced that the judiciary in Canada will be selected. If you're going to be a candidate to be a judge, you have to produce a dossier that specifies your identities, whatever they happen to be, racial, ethnic, religious, and then the committee that's going to appoint you to the judiciary has to have undergone mandatory anti-racism and bias training before they're allowed to serve on the committee. So basically, we've set up a situation in Canada where the people who select our judges have to go a kind of indoctrination that has no validity from a scientific perspective before they're allowed to select our judges.
Oh, right. Okay. I just don't understand. Some recognition that the selection process shouldn't be decided or shouldn't be necessarily polluted by advantages. So, yes, you recognize that people have their own motivations, and then you recognize that you can't discriminate based on those things in a blanket way. And so, to me, it's always going to be a complex equation. You want people put in the right job for the right reasons. Not that complicated. I mean, being a judge is a huge responsibility. I think they ought to have, some kind of a, system. I mean, my system would be you have harsher accountability the more power you have. The more we put bracelets on your ankles, and the more we watch everything you do, and the more we make it more and more public, the more and more power you get, the more exposed to catching you in bias crimes. The more power we give the people to see a self-interest actualized.
Now, who's enforcing this? Where
The
did this
Justice
come
Minister.
from?
The Federal Justice Minister.
Where did this program come from?
Oh, there's all sorts of people who are offering these programs now.
And so
it's become a growth industry.
Right, and this is a horror. Somehow, like I say, he didn't explain exactly how this is a horrible idea. First, that we have people out themselves as being ethicist or something, some agenda. And then we have the people who are going to make the decision recognize that, well, it's still judge a man based on the content of his character, not the clubs he belongs to. What's wrong with that? I'm not afraid of that. Let me think. Let me sit here and see if I can conjure up some... Oh, it's horrible. Oh, No, I can't conjure up any hard fear of that.
What is their qualifications? That's a good question, right? None.
Qualifications.
Zero.
Yeah,
Huh? The eyebrows are
qualifications.
raised.
Yeah, well, there's no way of having qualifications for
Right.
doing this sort of thing because it's not a valid procedure.
So how
the
do
people
they-
who claim to be qualified.
So they claim to be qualified, they come to the university and they say I have a solution. The university
Yeah.
says, finally, just run with it. And
That's
they just
exactly right.
implement it because to question anything that would absolve racism is racist.
Yes, right. Yes, and they did that in Clark.
Yeah, well, it sort of is, right? I mean, to question in the sense of you're just making accusations, okay? There's no demonstration that none of this stuff has any value. You're just claiming it doesn't have any value, and you're claiming the motives of the people who are implementing it are some sort of Marxist, Leninist, gulag fantasy. So, yeah, it sort of, makes you people kind of obvious in your motives. I wouldn't let you on the jury. I wouldn't let you on the judgeship. Because, yeah, you seem really biased.
Collaboration with the Black Liberation Collective, which is
Explain that one, because that
Black Liberation Collective. So that doesn't sound good.
one's adorable. The Black Liberation Collective, isn't that the group that somehow thinks that white people are inferior because they don't have enough melanin?
Yeah, it was started by a woman who said exactly that. She's a black supremacist, and she said that the reason that white people are inferior is because they don't have enough melanin in their skin. And melanin apparently is this agent. It's obviously it's a pigment, but it's apparently this agent that transforms cosmic energy into wisdom. I mean, she's completely. You can make up your own mind about her, and then the other person who started.
Right. Okay. And so, I'll pigeonhole your side with every wacky piece of propaganda that's coming out of the white supremacists, right? So I'll take every bit of that crap and I'll sit there and say, that's your club. I mean, is there any real point in doing that? Let's find a black supremacist and let's argue, let's define the conversation based on what the worst of the libs say and what the worst of the righties say. And then say, yes, that was the rational thing to do. I don't think so.
Black Liberation Collective is a woman who used to work for the University of Toronto Students' Union who is now being pursued by that Students' Union for embezzling $300,000 from that organization with the help of a couple of her cronies.
Well, why let a few facts stand in the way of abolishing racism?
Yeah, well, they also.
So again, this has something to do with the subject of racism. A racist.
Are perfectly willing to promote violent means of social transformation. And the university claims that it's in favor of safety, because they've gone after me because my refusal to use compelled pronouns has apparently made the campus unsafe. But they're perfectly willing to take advice from the Black Liberation Collective, and not only are they willing to take advice from them and not disavow them despite their support for violent means of social revolution, they're also pushing equality of outcome on their employees. And the people who taught their mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training program said outright in their training material, which I have copies of, that any institution that doesn't have equality of outcome as part of its characteristic at every level of the power organization is corrupt and should be restructured.
Okay, well, you could have shown us that's exactly what they said, that it's corrupt and should be restructured. But see, these are all just claims made. Now, what the real statement is about the fact that, yes, outcomes are important. So if, by anybody's standards, if, you're going to judge, a baking recipe based on the outcomes, you're going to base everything on an outcome. And if your objective isn't to make cookies, what's the point?
But that pales in comparison to my refusal to use compelled pronouns, obviously.
I just don't understand how this gets so far. I just don't understand how no one has... There's no rational thinking.
So again, this gets so far. We don't have any videotape of this train wreck, this fire and death and horror, all the screaming hard... This is like a 1.2 earthquake. I mean, you're just not going to be able to find anything too scary except a couple of little cracks and a couple of bricks. But it's anything, anything that threatens, the status quoers, get all paranoid.
Involved in the administration and the people that are implementing these ideas. I just don't understand how it gets to the point where...
things get to terrible places one tiny step at a time. If I encroach on you and I'm sophisticated about it, I'm going to encroach 2 millimeters. I'm going to encroach right to the point where you start to protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. Then you're going to calm down. Then I'm going to encroach again, right to the point where you protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait.
Yes, exactly. And we see how you cunts have played that game in sense of, we'll cut taxes on the rich, and and then we'll do compassionate conservatism. We'll say some of this. We'll distract you with some kind of bullshit, and then a little more tax cuts, a little more, and then when you have no money, you'll blame the unions because of the bad contracts you made and say, we don't have to live up to those contracts. Even though we signed them, we don't have to live up to them because we don't have any money. And why don't you have any money? Oh, that's right, but you gave all the money to the rich. That's what they did in New Jersey. See, they cut taxes on the richest people in New Jersey back in the Whitman days, and they never fixed it. They just said, we don't have any money. Just, we let the rich have a free ride, and now we don't have any money. And so we can't meet our contractual obligations. That makes sense.
And I'm just going to do that forever. And before you know it, you're going to be back 3 miles from where you started, and you'll have done it one step at a time. And then you'll go, oh, how'd I get here? And the answer was, well, I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone, and you agreed. And so then I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone again, and you agreed. And if anybody...
Right, and exactly how the whole deficit gets created, right? $1 billion at a time. Borrow your children's money. Oh, it's wrong, but let's do it some more. It's wrong, but no, let's do it some more.
Somebody's interested in this sort of process, and this is a horrifying book. If you want to read about how this process works, you can read a book called Ordinary Men by Robert Browning. And Ordinary Men is about, Browning was interested in how the Nazis trained how they trained people to kill, basically. And so Robert Browning studied this police battalion. It's a very interesting book. So these were middle-aged German men. So they were raised and educated really before Hitler came to power. So they weren't indoctrinated Nazis. They were policemen. And when the Nazis went through Poland and then needed to impose their brand of order on Poland, they brought policemen in. They brought this battalion
And I'm sure this relates to what policemen are doing now, okay, in terms of how they treat people. I mean, Whitey's just getting killed by the cops every day. I mean, the cops are such a threat to Whitey.
Middle-aged policemen in. And their commandant, their commander, was by all accounts a pretty decent guy. He told them that because it was wartime, they were probably going to have to do some pretty terrible things, but that they could go home if they didn't think they were up to it. So there was no compulsion. This wasn't a Milgram experiment or an experiment where you had to obey orders. The guy who was giving the orders said, look, this is going to be awful, but you can back off. But the guys thought, well, I'm not going to leave my comrades here to do the dirty work, which is kind of a virtue in a perverse way. And then Browning details how they went from ordinary policemen to guys who were taking naked pregnant women out into the middle of fields and shooting them in the back of the head. And they were physically ill during most of the transformation process. They started out by rounding up the Jewish men between the ages of 16 and 65. Well, you can kind of understand that because you're at war. And then they put them in stadiums. And then they had to shoot some of them. And then they had to load them on cattle cars. It was like one step at a time. These guys were having a dreadful time of it. They didn't stop. And so that's how things get to where they are now. Is that, I know they're not at that point, and I'm not trying to make the case that they're at that point.
Well, it sounds like you are. This whole rhetoric, it sounds like you got this huge paranoia that you're going to be put in, some sort of you're too cliche camp. I'm not totally opposed, frankly, but whatever. I think there seems, it's sort of to a point where there needs to be a war for the character of humankind. I mean, either we're going to be idiocracy or we're going to be something better. And, in my opinion, you're just part of idiocracy. This knee-jerky bullshit.
The first people that's sounding an alarm. That there's a real issue with controlling people. There's a real issue with controlling dialogue, controlling the way people communicate. And that these ideologies, although seemingly innocuous, they can take you down very dangerous roads.
Yes, well, seemingly innocuous ideology. Those words, innocuous ideology, those words do not go together.
Well, again, the sub, let's just remember what the sub current is here, is that we're trying to achieve something called fairness and maybe even equity, justice, social justice warrior. Again, they're mocking something as intrinsically, fundamentally sensible as social justice.
There are no innocuous ideologies, and they're forms of pathological oversimplification, and they're also clubs. I mean the kind of clubs that you hit people with, as well as the clubs that you belong to. The advantage to me being an ideologue is that I can explain everything. I can feel morally superior, and I know who my enemies are.
And how are you not one of these people, though? I don't even understand. How are you not just one of these talking head propagandists for a position? Oh, I know. That's exactly what you are.
You know what you're supposed to do with enemies. They're not your friends, right? You move against them. And, we're approaching a situation, and this has already happened, I think, more in the United States than in Canada, although our countries are competing to see who can cross the idiot line fastest. You're in a situation in the U.S. where 50% of your population won't talk to the other 50%. That's not good. And I would say it's more pronounced on the left liberal side because they regard everybody who voted for Trump as essentially as an enemy. It's like, hey, people.
Yeah, well, I mean, he is. There's no other way to look at it. There is a line somewhere where you just say this is way beyond acceptable. I mean, somebody who looks at the world and says, who has done the best over the last 40 years? The rich. Nobody has increased. Nobody has had a better, more. Everything has gone right for in this country over the last 10 years, the last 20 years, the last 30 years, the last 40 years than the richest people in the world, the 1%. And who does he want to cut taxes for? Those people. As if they're aggrieved, as if they are in the economic gulag. And we're totally suppressing this huge value that we have to release. I mean, it's just, how can anybody take that seriously as not something that's just obnoxiously anti-social and totally unproductive? It's the biggest blight we have, and they want to make the blight stronger. I mean, if somebody is, if the blob comes from outer space and somebody is feeding it chocolate, for fuck's sake, yeah, you shoot that bastard.
That's 50% of your citizens. You might think about talking with them. You know?
Talking like what? Fuck you, asshole. What conversation is there if you're so fucking stupid to think the goddamn rich need to be empowered? They're not powerful enough. They're not rich enough. How the fuck do you have a conversation with somebody that fucking dumb? While they claim their hero is somebody who inherited it, for fuck's sake. He fucking goddamn inherited $1 billion in real world money today. If he had done nothing but kept the real estate and not fucked anything up at all, just the increase in the value of the real estate would have made him a multi-billionaire. And the guy is such a fucking failure, he hasn't made enough money in the last 20 years to need to pay property taxes, and then he claims he's a multi-billionaire. How did he make any income? If he made any income, he would have already paid back the amount of money he lost. So he wouldn't have the tax exemption. So how can you not make money for 20 fucking years and then claim, I've increased my fortune? How can you do that? Except through fucking lying. Which makes this even more grotesque. And I'm supposed to say that that's a person we're talking to? Fuck you, idiot. It's a person we're shitting on.
People you can't talk to, those are enemies.
Well, ironically, I really truly believe that one of the big factors in Trump's rise to power is that people are sick of this oversimplification, this ridiculous ideology coming from him.
I mean, amazing. The oversimplification. Yes, tax cuts increase revenue. It works every time, except every single time it doesn't work.
Like this
Yeah, they're sick of
enforcing
identity politics.
Exactly. And so they've chosen an identity politics that opposes the identity politics that they think is...
Well, I think that's just a pile of crap. I mean, look, the whole tranny thing, I don't think they give a fuck about anything that really matters, because they're all caught up in their own kind of self-obsession and my identity crisis and blah, blah, blah. So if you were to turn that into this other political subject, I think it's just fucking idiotic. But go ahead, you're an idiot. What should I expect from an idiot? Surprise, surprise.
disgusting.
Yeah, and that's just starting.
It's just
That's
starting.
That's
It is
right.
just starting.
That's right. Well, if you teach one side to play identity politics, de facto you teach the other side to play identity politics. And I see more and more people who are center people, as far as I'm concerned, push to the right
Yes.
because of the continual insistence that Biden.
Right, and you're pushing me to the left, so exactly. So, yes, bravo. Way to go. Yes, the pendulum problem, it seems we're not going to get past it because you're just saying I got to sit there and fret and I got to go nutty, okay, and fight back. And yes, that fight back is you're not going to punch the people you're trying to punch, you're going to punch other people. So you want to get the foreigners, so you end up punching the people who think there should be something like workers' rights or environmental protection or something else. You throw out all the babies because you want to get that one, the one shitty one that you think's in the tub.
Mere existence, they're part of the perpetrator group.
Just by being a white person who is somehow or another successful, you are a privileged person, you're a part of the elite, you're part of the 1%, you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right, and successful means what, generally speaking? Successful means I either screwed my employees or I screwed the customers to make more money than I was really entitled to, than the real value of my contribution. I gamed them. I Barnum and Bailey'd them. I ran a racket. Okay, because anything beyond, a reasonable salary, that's the definition. And we know that success is all this, I have to be a millionaire, I have to be a billionaire. And again, where are you going to point to the people that have that kind of wealth that made it from nothing? It's a tiny percentage of the wealth holders. Tiny percentage. And you take no account. None whatsoever. You just ignore the subject entirely. That most of the wealth in the hands of the 1% was not put in their hands for any good reason whatsoever. No earning required. None.
You're part of the oppressors. Yeah, absolutely.
You're an oppressor by being just
by
a person
being.
with a home in the suburbs.
Well, and it's also extremely
Well,
annoying.
that's a lie, right? So we're not misidentifying the enemy. Well, you were saying, yeah, if you vote for Trump, you've sent a signal. You've told me what you think of civilization. You just don't give a fuck. You're in it for what's in it for you, and that's it. Grab them by the pussy and, bash them with your cop club.
For people who've worked really hard and who made the requisite sacrifices to become successul along some dimension.
So, again, successful along some dimension. Again, this is just such an innocuous thing. Oh, yeah, they did their hard work and they earned it. Well, again, give me $50 million in New York real estate back in 1971. And let's see what I could have done with it. I mean, it's just bullshit. Again, this whole idea that, oh, yeah, we're all in a fair fight here. No, this isn't anything close to a fair fight. And you cheaters, you're sitting there with your gloves just ringing with the brass knuckles in them. Your cheats are just overtly layered all over you. Your clubs, your gun, the whole thing. And you're in this boxing match and you're bitching again, saying, "Oh, you're losing because you don't know how to tie your shoes." Fuck you.
Immediately attributed to their oppression.
Yes.
And it's not obvious that that's something we want to do. It's like, for the social justice warrior types out there who might be listening, it's like, are you really willing to say that every single person who's accomplished something has done that as a consequence of oppression? That's
Yeah, and that's not the argument, though. The argument that isn't that every single one of you is a scumbag. The argument is that the preponderance of the wealth holders are scum. That's right, they didn't earn it. They're talking about other people tying their bootstraps, doing this, doing that. They never had to tie a single shoelace in their fucking life. And they're sitting there ridiculing other people and demeaning them and insulting them because somehow they couldn't inherit it. Well, why couldn't you just inherit it? I did. It was really easy. Can't you figure it out, shithead, how to inherit $1 million? You scumbags, you lazy people. I mean, I did it. You don't see that in the world, assholes. I mean, you're seriously telling me you don't see that's how the world is run right now, jackass. That it's all a fucking, the Bush family, the whole idea that we're running Clinton 2 against Bush 2 and all that kind of crap, or 3. You don't see how it's some sort of entitlement class that's pulling all the strings. And that any rational person should say, fuck this. This is a rigged motherfucking game.
The Soviets claimed with regards to the successful peasants just before the 1920s. It's like, well, the peasants weren't emancipated. They were serfs until about 30 years before that. They were serfs. They were basically slaves. And some of them had clambered up to the point where maybe they owned their hut and a cow and could, employ someone. Well, the Soviet claim was, well, that's all theft. You got that all because you're an oppressor. And so then the Soviet intellectuals went into the villages. And just imagine how...
So again, let's just understand that this is his characterization of the difference between people who are acquiring ownership of the means of production, and that somebody somebody has no right to see any threat in that acquisition, in the entitlement class of, I now have silos of wheat, I have resources. So I can not only borrow on my resources, but I can also lend money. I can collect interest. I can have the safety net thing again. Again, the argument is you can understand the difference between people competing in a field. Like I said, if they're trapeze artists, the difference between somebody doing it well while they have a net and somebody doing it well without a net. That it's two different games being played. Really different. You wouldn't want to live the I don't have a net. You wouldn't want to play the I don't have a net game.
How this happened. So imagine a village, a small town where everyone knows everybody, and there's maybe 10, 20 people there who are moderately successful. Okay, and so you can imagine that those 20 people have like 100 enemies at the bottom of the socioeconomic distribution.
Well, again, they're only moderately successful. So again, what is the definition of moderately successful? How many mansions and yachts do they own? How much of the territory do they own? How many acres do they own? How much do they control? How much do they increase prices through that control? Through that conversion of the value of the land into a monetized commodity that represents their holding of entitlement pie. Inflation. Inflation of the resource value through its conversion into a monetized owned commodity.
and resentful about the fact that these people have been successful. Okay, so now the intellectuals come in and say, property is theft, success is oppression. And then they look for the people in the village who are willing to move against those 20 successful people. Well, those guys at the bottom, those 100 resentful, jealous, murderous people at the bottom.
So again, see, that's all this comes down to. If you're arguing that a fair fight is necessary, in my opinion, to a good game, fair rules. You can't have a horse race where you give advantages. So again, my only argument is that all of the excesses, all of the William Randolph Hearst and the Apple guy and Bill Gates and all of these huge excesses that take place, they wouldn't matter if those resources had to go back into the game, okay, when they're done playing their little hoarder, selfish bastard bullshit, okay? But it doesn't. So as long as you allow this legacy control and this legacy distribution within a limited small club, anybody who's rational should see that as a huge breaking of the fairness rules. That's just saying we're going to give some horses, because you're the son or daughter of Secretariat, we're going to put you halfway down the track, and then we're going to ring the bell. And that's bullshit. And all the other horses should say, fuck you, I'm not playing. But because they're desperate, they play, even though they haven't got a fucking hope.
They're just waiting for an opportunity to go kick down some doors. And that's exactly what they did in the 1920s. And as I said, they wiped out all their productive peasants. And then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death. They had posters. The Soviets produced posters in the 1930s that said, essentially, don't forget it's wrong to eat your children. So
yeah, and that might be a metaphor. So that might be the Khrushchev thing, like, we'll bury you. Where he's really talking about, we'll bury you on the ash heap of history. That in the future, it's going to be known that this game was corrupt and bigoted and totally useless to mankind. And so this might be the same argument, is that the future is bigger than the present. And you little selfish now people saying, I must have my yacht now, are compromising the future of the Soviet Union. You're feeding on our future. That might be what that message represents. But you wouldn't get it because you're a professor. Fuckhead.
Whoa. Yeah, whoa. There's nothing about the there's nothing that you can imagine that's horrible enough so that it matched the reality of what happened in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 19.
Right, so this guy doesn't have an agenda. 1919 and, I should have listened to the dates better. 1919.
As I said, they wiped out all their productive peasants. And then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death. They had posters. The Soviets produced posters in the 1930s that said, essentially, don't forget it's wrong to eat your children. So, whoa. Yeah, whoa. There's nothing about there's nothing that you can imagine that's horrible enough so that it matched the reality of what happened in the Soviet Union between 1919.
I did it again.
In 1959.
Oh, there we go. 1959. Yeah, so that's before Khrushchev, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, well, whatever. People argue that who knows Soviet history and who knows even American history. People argue about this stuff, endlessly. And I'm not saying that. My argument with the Soviet Union, my primary argument wasn't so much the socialism; it was the insane, bigotries against, the homophobia, the rock and roll is the threat, and it was all that kind of stuff. It was the controlling of people's social lives that was just the insane part. So the very fact that they combined those two things, this insane fear of information and exposure to ideas and all that stuff, the whole KGB stuff that had nothing to do with socialism. But again, there's no denying that the Soviet Union was a huge success story in the sense that it was a small population that did miraculous things when you consider the smallness of the population. And the fact that we had a huge head start over the Soviet Union in terms of the Industrial Revolution and a country that was easily exploited for its resources. And the Soviets made it happen, with less. What's the? I'm trying to come up with a. They had less of a car, and they won the race, so to speak. They ran a good race with a car that should have not even been close to good enough. So you can't just say parts of it weren't valuable. But I'm not going to say yes. That was the plan. It was the greatest idea ever, implemented by the greatest people ever. That's not my argument. I'm just saying the kernel of it, that civilization is made, not fallen into, was perfectly rational. That you have to build a civilization. You can't just wait for it to happen.
You know, the West knew about this too. Early, Malcolm Muggeridge in the 30s was documenting for England, for English newspapers, exactly what was going on in the Soviet Union. Bloody intellectuals didn't admit it till the mid-70s, with the exception of people like George Orwell. So,
why do these patterns repeat themselves? What is it about human beings?
Well,
what patterns repeat what selves? Exactly. I mean, it seems to me the pattern you're going to repeat is the stock market crash, and Rome falling, and all of that stuff, the mighty fall. Because they don't think about what's necessary to maintain a civilization. They just expect it to happen.
we like things simple. So, and often, like, simple.
Well, it seems that you want